Hello, welcome back. Welcome to the graveyard or to the graveyard shift. Welcome back to Short Bites, Stephen King podcast. I'm your host Jason White, and this on this episode we're going to be discussing the short story Graveyard Shift, and I've invited one of my friends to come and help me out, and that is Nicholas Kaufman. Hi Nick, how are you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. You've had me on your YouTube program a few times to talk about my books,
Yeah,
and
two or
it's
three
really
times.
it's a pleasure to be back with you talking about Stephen King.
Absolutely. So can you please give us an introduction to both yourself and your work?
Yeah, sure. So again, my name is Nicholas Kaufman. I am the best-selling author of the science-based horror thrillers, The Hungry Earth, The Stone Serpent, and The Mindworms. And I also have a podcast called Spooky Science Lab that I co-host with David Wellington, who is another horror and science fiction writer, in which we talk about strange but true science facts.
Oh, I love that podcast.
Thank you.
You guys are so funny, and you talk about like the craziest science facts. I I want to explain just a little bit about the podcast. There's like two parts to it on each episode.
Yeah.
There's your part, which is mostly Earth
Yes,
centered weird science, and then there's David's, which is more space oriented
that's correct.
science. And those are like my two favorite things aside from horror and and whatnot.
You like Earth and space.
I do. I like space a bit more, but space terrifies me just alone.
I got to tell you that one of the things that I'm really learning from Dave's segments on the podcast is that space is constantly looking for new ways to kill you.
Yes. It's a miracle we're even here, honestly.
We actually just recorded an episode where he puts me in what we call our magic spacesuit, which is the spacesuit that allows us to withstand things that would normally kill a human.
Yeah,
And he sends me to the moon of Jupiter called Io, and
nice.
then he lists basically this. He shows me the 7 ways that this planet, this moon, uh, can ostensibly kill me, and it was very scary, very scary.
It is scary. It's like you can't go anywhere without radiation destroying you
Enormous
or
amounts of radiation, absolutely. And then there's also like weird volcanoes on that
yeah.
moon and everything. I don't want to get us sidetracked because I could talk about this for literally the entire length of this episode. But but it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a good one, and it's and thank you again for listening to our podcast. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you once you mentioned that on uh words are failing me today on social media. When you announced it, I was like, "Oh my god, this is awesome!" I
Thank
got to
you.
listen
Yeah,
in on this.
we recently just celebrated our 1000th download, which is I know that's not a lot for a podcast, I guess, but for us, for a little podcast like ours, that's pretty amazing. And so we're
Yeah.
really thrilled with that.
Well, congratulations. That's not easy to do. A lot of podcasts don't make it past their first 7 episodes. So uh,
Is that really a statistic?
that is a stat. Yes.
Holy moly. Well, I hope you do better than 7 because there are so many Stephen King stories to talk about.
There are, right? It's like I was talking to other people in previous episodes that I could technically do this for the rest of my life. There's a plethora of things you can talk about.
Absolutely. You could have a weekly discussion of each story in his oeuvre, and by the time you reached the last story, he will have published several more collections, and you could just keep going and going and going.
Yeah, well, we're at number 3 now, so we're almost
Yeah,
halfway there.
yeah. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's right.
So before we get on with the Stephen King origin questions, I believe that you have a book coming out this year, if I'm correct, and I
I
think it's a
do.
collection.
Yes, it's a collection. It's a collection of horror stories and weird fiction. It's called Monuments in Darkness.
Nice.
Very uplifting title. Uh, it's
It's
coming
like
out.
it's going to be a happy read.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel good stories.
Feel good.
Um, it's coming out this summer. I don't have a date yet. We're aiming for June or July, but because I'm working with a smaller press, sometimes those things are up in the air. The press I'm working with is actually a very well-known press here in New York City called Hippocampus Press.
Oh, yeah, I'm aware of them. Yeah.
They do a lot of weird fiction, Lovecraftiana, stuff like that. And I'm absolutely delighted to be working with them.
Awesome. And when's the release date?
We don't know for sure, as I was saying, but it's probably going to be June or July.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Here's an invitation to come on to the Weird Reads podcast, my other podcast, and we can
Happy
discuss
to.
it there. We can discuss the stories there.
I always enjoy talking with you, so I will be there.
All right, let's do it.
Yes.
All right, so we're gonna move now into the Stephen King questions. Before we get to graveyard shift, new guests, which at this point is every episode, they get the origin story questions, which is just basically your relationship with Stephen King. And um, because you're only one person, you get them all. The last episode, I had like 2 or 3 people on, and so
Oh, wow.
I cut it down to 4 questions. But this time it's all of them that I
All
have
right.
anyway. I might change them as we go. Who knows? But
Hit me.
yeah. First question. What's your Stephen King origin story? How did you get introduced to him?
Okay, well, I was actually not a big Stephen King reader in my youth. I was really, once I got into horror, I was much more into Clive Barker. I did not read a
Hmm.
lot of King, though I knew of King. Obviously, you couldn't be involved in the horror world without knowing about King.
Yeah, absolutely.
But my very first exposure to Stephen King, so this was the summer of 1982. I was 13 years old. I was at summer camp, and one of the counselors at the camp had a men's magazine called Gallery, which I don't think still exists now. And there was a story in it called The Raft by Stephen King.
Yeah.
And I don't really remember much. This was already 40 plus years ago. But I do remember that I read that story. So at some point, I must have borrowed the magazine from him. Maybe he said there's a scary story in it, or maybe I was just like, I want to look at the pictures or whatever. But I
Yeah,
wound up
yeah.
reading.
I was gonna say, like, are you sure that you didn't stare at the pictures for long periods of time before
It's possible, but
they
what I
got boring?
remember, and this is really the strength of Stephen King's writing, what I remember from that experience is not the pictures, but the story and how it really got under my skin. It's a lot of, I think, more casual Stephen King folks might remember The Raft from Creepshow 2, where there was
Mhm.
an adaptation of that story.
Yeah,
But it's very gooey. It's between The Raft and the remake of The Blob in 1988. I really
yeah,
developed a fear of gooey things.
yeah. It's like the blob on a lake.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just,
Yeah,
but it's written so viscerally. There's a scene where someone, and this stayed with me to this day, the scene where someone gets pulled into the water through the very narrow space
yeah,
between slats on the raft. And
yeah,
it was just grisly and gruesome, and it stuck with me. It's not, it didn't become like my favorite Stephen King story after I wound up reading more of his works, but it's one that really stuck with me.
yeah. I read that recently. During the Christmas break, I was reading Skeleton Crew,
Mhm.
and that story is pretty good. I have some issues with it, but only because the characters are they're
Okay, I
all
mean, the
they're all
jerks.
just likable. You can't like any of them.
I know, but I was 13 years old and I was like, "Oh my God, not only are these teenagers having sex, but they're also getting killed in gruesome ways. This is
Yeah.
awesome."
Well, that was the awesome part. It's like it's really interesting, like cosmic type horror, right?
Right, because you never find out what that sludge is. They
Yeah,
say it just looks like an oil slick, but you just never know what it
and it's
is.
just doing what it's doing. It's like it's eating or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. It's
yeah,
like many monsters, they're really just often they're just animals, and they're just doing what animals do to survive, which is hunt and kill.
exactly. And I think he kind of mentions that in the story too, if I'm remembering correctly. That this thing is just it's just hungry or something like that. It's just
It's
doing what
super
it
hungry
does.
because it
Yeah.
eats four full-grown humans. It's
And
very hungry.
yeah, and it grows too, which is kind of disturbing.
So that was my first, and I think even at that age, at 13, I wasn't sure yet if I had even heard of Stephen King or not at that
Hmm.
age. It's probably I had, but I certainly had not read him before that. Later on, I read, my brother had um, Night Shift and Skeleton Crew, and I read those, and I picked up a used copy of what was it, The Dark Half. That was my first Stephen
Mm,
King novel.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
Did you like that, The Dark Half?
I liked parts of it. I liked it conceptually. I
Hmm.
think there were parts, there were characters that I thought were a little caricature-y, which is rare for King. I think King's strength really is in making characters that are relatable, and not all of them were in that
Yeah.
particular book. But I loved the idea of it, especially as I was a burgeoning writer at the time, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is about a writer whose imagination basically comes to life."
Yeah.
And I thought
Now,
that was super cool.
that book is like really vicious. It's one of his most vicious, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
if I remember correctly. Um, Now, you started reading a lot of King's short fiction, so I kind of think I might know the answer to this question. But would you rather read only King novels or his short stories for the rest of your life?
That's a interesting question, and the funny answer is that his stories are getting so much longer and longer as
Yeah, yeah.
as he's been writing
Even
them
his
that
short stories.
they're practically novels already.
Yeah,
Um, I love short stories. I love the form of short stories. I think he is very good at short stories. But lately, and maybe this is just the mood I've been in lately, but I've been reading a lot more novels than short story collections.
hmm
So that's a tough answer. I mean, it's a tough question to answer. I'm going to go with stories, but I love his novels too.
yeah. I love the novels. I always go with the short stories as the answer, though, because I include novellas in that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
consider like The Mist to be
yeah.
one of his best stories, even though it's practically novel length.
Oh, it's definitely it's like short novel to long novella length. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely. There's just so much more too. I mean, he's got a lot of novels, and you could just talk about his novels for the rest of your life, and you have
Well,
like
that's what I think is so interesting about your podcast. I think very few people who talk about Stephen King on podcasts focus solely on their short stories.
yeah, and that's the reason. Like, yeah, that was definitely I want to actually do that with weird reads as an aside too. I want to start talking about short stories like from Shirley Jackson and whatnot.
Very cool.
And yeah, so. Uh, but to get back on track here, I'm wondering,
This is going to
what
be
it
your longest episode.
oh, well, we have about an hour and a half, so I don't know. What is it about Stephen King's writing that attracts you to it?
Well, I touched earlier on his great use of character. He's amazing at characterization, and he's so good at doing it quickly. By
Mhm.
the end of that first chapter, you know exactly who that main character is, and you are there right there with them. I also think just has a great imagination. Like he's done lots of classic stuff, like Salem's Lot is a great sort of classic vampire story, but he's also done stuff that's really modern and cutting edge and hadn't been done before. I think of like It, or I think of like The Stand, two of his best novels, in my opinion, and they're utterly original for their time. I mean, we have tons of stories now about people going back to their childhood, towns or whatever, to face an evil or whatever. But I really feel like King nailed it with It, uh, and I think he's got a great imagination. I think he's great with characters. I think his dialogue sometimes is out of this world. Like
Oh
as a
yeah,
writer, I strive to make my dialogue as realistic as possible, and he makes it look so effortless. I really respect him.
yeah. He's also really good with like odd details of things that we notice while we're just
Yeah,
walking down the street that nobody remembers but him. I swear to God. The last story that we talked about was um oh, I'm drawing a blank here. The Salem's Lot is not Jerusalem's Lot.
Jerusalem's Lot. Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
Jerusalem's
completely
Lot.
different from the novel. Completely
Absolutely.
different.
Very different, yeah.
It's
Uh,
very Lovecraftian, as I remember. It's very much an
yeah,
homage to Lovecraft's New England.
absolutely. But there's a scene in there where they walk across like an old church floor and it's covered in dust. And when they turn around, they see their footprints in the dust. And that really impressed me because like that's something you would see, but you'd never talk about and you don't even
Right,
remember it. Yeah.
right. And he's got the ability to draw really like emotional response from those details.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's so good. He's very good at that.
Yes, and, that's one thing I love about his writing is just that crazy detail and the characters. You're right about the characters too, like, his characters breathe life, like, they're people you know what I mean? Or at
Yeah.
least if you don't know them, you get to know them and they feel real, which
You
is
know,
hard to do.
I recently read Pet Cemetery for the very first time. Like I
Uh-huh.
said, I'm a latecomer to King.
Yeah.
especially his earlier works. Um, and the main character, I'm forgetting the names now, but the main character decides he's going to dig up his young boy who died.
Hmm.
And as a reader, you're like, that's the dumbest thing I can think of. But you're right there with him because
Yeah.
King takes you by the hand and leads you through his thought process, leads you through all the parts of his character that would lead him to do this. And it's just masterfully done. So even on a rational level where you're like, that sounds like a bad idea, you're right there. You're like, I get why he's doing it.
Thanks. Yeah. I love that too. Now, you're not the first person to be late to Stephen King. I was kind of late
Mm.
to Stephen King too. I started reading Robert R. McCammon, Dean Koontz, John
Oh,
Saul,
wow.
and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff first. And I don't know why, but it took me until I was like 18 or so before I started reading King.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
I read King sporadically, like those early collections that I got from my brother. Those were like in the '80s when I read them, but it took me a long time to get to like Salem's Lot. I think I read maybe 5 years ago for the first time.
yeah.
Like it took me a while to get to his novels, and I'm very glad I did, especially his earlier works. I'm really enjoying.
Have you read a lot of Stephen King's novels?
I've read about somewhere between 20 and 25 of his books, including some collections. And for any other author, that would make me like, a scholar of their work. But
Yeah, I know what you mean.
it's barely a dent in his oeuvre.
Yeah, I've read 55 books, and that includes like short story collections and whatnot, right?
Yeah,
Um,
55, and that's maybe half his output.
but there's nobody else I read that well. Nobody else has that kind of well, I wouldn't say nobody, but a lot of writers don't have that kind of output,
That's right.
and and I just don't read that many author like I don't read the authors that heavily. Like
Hmm.
I don't know, there's
You,
just something like magnetic about his work. But he's not
yeah,
always like spot on. Do you have any uh novels of his that just didn't click with you? You didn't like?
yeah. What was it? Dreamcatcher.
Oh,
I read Dreamcatcher when it came out. I bought it in hardcover. I was so excited. I
yeah,
was like, yeah, Stephen King is returning to Aliens, like he did with the Tommyknockers, which is another
yeah.
one that I actually don't love that much, but still.
Tommy Knockers,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but I was like, this is terrible. Like I finished it because for whatever reason, even though I now am an adult and not in school and I can stop reading a book whenever I want, I still wind up finishing books even if I don't like them. Maybe I'm trying to learn something from them. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I finished that one and I just thought it was terrible. And then I saw the movie and I thought the movie
Oh,
somehow was even worse.
it really was. Like,
Somehow it was just even worse.
yeah, I remember I did the same thing. I got the hardback when it came out and I read it and I had this I didn't hate it. I was just like, nah, it wasn't great.
It's forgettable,
Yeah,
certainly.
it's got some forgettable elements, that's for sure. But the movie, oh my god, the movie.
So
Oh,
bad.
I
So
don't.
the book that came out after that was, I think, From a Buick 8.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't read that one because I'd been warned against it by a number of friends who were big into Stephen King. So I think maybe that was just sort of I think that was right after his accident. And I think it was just sort of a nebulous time for his writing where he maybe wasn't hitting the mark. But that's just my opinion,
Yeah.
obviously.
Have
Um,
you still not read From a Buick 8?
I still have not. No.
Because it's very divided, but I really enjoyed that one.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And there's a small group of people I admire in the Stephen King community, especially the podcasting community, that really love that book. So
Oh, okay.
I need to reread it. I'm going to reread it
I
hopefully
will.
this
I
year.
will
But
give it some thought then. Definitely.
it's kind of bonkers, but it's also a bit of a Dark Tower book. Are you into the Dark Tower at all?
I am not that into the Dark
Okay,
Tower mythos.
then
I know I'm
that's
like
not
a
going to be a
real
draw for you.
I'm a real outlier on that.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Peter Straub fan. I love
Uh,
everything Peter Straub wrote. So when I read Black House, um, I couldn't get into it. It was too much about, in my mind, it was too much about the Dark Tower mythos and
yeah.
not enough about, I don't know, what the talisman was serving up at the time.
Have you thought about diving into the Dark Tower at all, or is that just not your
I haven't given it
thing?
any thought, I got to say, and I hope this isn't enraging the Stephen King fans who listen to
No,
this podcast. But um, there are other books I'd like to get to before that.
yeah, I find Stephen King fans the constant readers, so to speak. They're pretty forgiving bunch.
They're
Instead of
pretty chill, yeah.
instead of like criticizing, oh, you haven't read Dark Tower? Well, geez, you're stupid. Instead of
Yeah.
being like that, they're more like they might try to convince you to read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which I would prefer to being like, you call yourself a Stephen King fan and
You're not a real Stephen King
you
fan
haven't
yet.
read The Wolves of the Kala? Like, what's that? Like, you're not a Stephen King fan.
No, you're in good company here. That's
Good,
fine.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Live and let live, I always said.
I agree completely.
Yeah. So on the opposite side of the coin, what's your favorite, would you say, of your Stephen King novels?
Ooh, that's a good one. I wanna go with It. It's a thick book. Anyone who's read It knows that it's a chunker. It took me about 2 months to get through, which is
Yeah.
unusual for me.
Hmm.
But I found that as I approached the end of the novel, I slowed down because I wasn't ready to say goodbye to these characters yet. The characters became so real to me over the course of that 1,200-page book, um, especially in their younger versions.
Hmm.
Just became so real to me that I felt like I was part of the Losers Club. I felt like I was part of that group of friends. And it's so rare to me to feel so immersed in a book like that and to really love the characters. So I think that's my favorite because it just sticks out for me in that way.
Well, that's a good one to choose. It's going to be a classic. Stephen King was quoted to saying, after all the books I've written, after I'm gone, all they're going to remember is that fucking clown.
But we should all be so lucky, right? We should all be so lucky to make
Yeah,
something that
absolutely. Yeah.
lasts beyond us. Like, uh, whether it's that fucking clown or vampires on a submarine, like
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah. And that,
It,
you know what? Nicholas Kaufman here is sort of ringing a bell because he's written a book with vampires on a submarine. Am I
100
am I
fathoms
on track
below.
there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
that tweet went viral at a time when Twitter was fun.
When Twitter was fun. When Twitter wasn't the toxic wasteland that it is now. Oh my God. So, since you started with short stories and and novellas and whatnot, you seem to have read a lot of them. Do you have a favorite short story by King that, or a novella? It doesn't matter that you.
Probably The Mist, but there's another one that's in Night Shift that I liked a lot and thought was super weird. It's the one about the astronaut who returns to Earth and he's starting to grow eyes all over his body.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
You'll
yeah.
get to that one. And I
I'll
think
get there. Yeah,
it's a little later in the collection.
yeah,
But that one's fantastic. And I also loved, I think it's called The Jaunt, where there's like this teleportation device, but you have to keep your eyes closed. You can't look at the place that you go through. But
yeah,
one person does and goes insane. And like I thought that was really cool. And I think
yeah.
that goes back to what I was saying before about Stephen King having really original, interesting ideas.
Hmm.
Like that's not a classic horror setup at all. It's not even a classic science fiction setup. It's like just something he came up with. Like you open your eyes during this teleportation and you go insane by what you see.
Absolutely. And the weird thing is, it's only like 30 pages or something like that. And
That's short for him.
yeah, it's short, but he creates an entire society
Hmm.
and with rules, and it's like a dystopian type of society, and it's really quite fascinating. And from
Yeah.
my understanding, they're wanting to at least adapt it into a TV series.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. That'd
I
be
don't
very
know.
interesting. Yeah.
I don't know how far that's gone, and for all I know, it's been axed already because that happens a lot.
Yeah,
But
sure. But I mean, Stephen King is one author who everything he writes gets optioned immediately, and he
yeah,
has and they have a better than average chance of actually being made into a movie or TV series.
yeah. Like look at some of the adaptations of recent, like The Life of Chuck. Have you read
Yeah,
that story?
I have not. No, that's
Well,
came out in a very recent collection, as I
yeah,
recall.
and let me tell you, that story seems like it would be impossible to adapt, but Mike Flanagan
Mike
appears to have
Flanagan,
done it. Yeah,
he's a good director. He knows what he's doing. I
yeah,
was really surprised that they turned Lisi's story into a mini series
yeah.
a few years back. I was like, what? Lisi's story? Like,
I
how are
know
you going to do that? And they did. So he
that's such
just
a
he just
bonkers story. Yeah,
he just always gets adapted. It's just
yeah,
it's automatic at this point.
yeah. So Stephen King, as we discussed, he has like a lot of different types of genres that he writes in, but he's primarily known as a horror writer. But I think that's mistaken and wrong. Especially now, he's more of a thriller writer. But throughout his entire career, you can see the science fiction, the fantasy, the elements of thriller, and of course horror. Horror was dominant in those early days, but uh, I'm getting somewhere with this, I promise. But he writes in a variety of different
Yeah.
genres, and he writes a variety of tropes. So I was wondering if he has ever failed to write a story in your preferred genre or trope, and if so, what type of story would you like to see King write?
Well, oh my God, he's got like 90 books or something. Like, I don't think there is a trope that he hasn't touched on yet.
Yeah,
Um, uh, so I don't know. That's an excellent question. Um,
I have an idea
you
that you
do?
might be appealed with. I think instead of doing aliens and stuff, maybe some hard science fiction horror or
Oh,
horror in
yeah.
space. I, I
Yeah,
would like
definitely.
I would like to see horror in space. Like he could use your podcast as a
Right. Yeah.
research tool.
Yeah. Hey, oh, our number one listener, Stephen King. Uh, taking it in the opposite direction, though, what might be interesting is if he did like a gothic,
Oh,
like an
yeah,
old school gothic horror novel, because
absolutely, yeah.
he excels at bringing horror into the modern recognizable world. But I wonder what he would do with his version of, say, like a Hammer Dracula kind of movie.
That
Like
would be great, yeah.
castles, cobwebs, and fog. It'd be interesting.
I like that idea too because he's kind of toyed with it here and there,
Hmm.
but he's never delved into like the time period and
Yeah, yeah. I know he's done things like I never read The Eyes of the Dragon. I know it's a fantasy novel, but I think that would probably be the closest maybe to this kind of thing.
yeah. Did you know he wrote that book for his daughter?
No, no, I didn't.
That's interesting. I always found that interesting because, yet he published it, but of course, right? But it's not necessarily one of King's favorites, and a lot of people bash on it for being such a typical fantasy story. But
Mm,
when you take that into account, he wrote it for his daughter, then it makes sense.
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not like I said, it's not one I've read. Um, but I understand that it ties into a little bit with the Dark Tower as well.
it
I heard,
it has some ties. Yeah,
yeah, there
but
are some recurring characters and whatnot.
if you're not a Dark Tower fan, though, I think even the books that do tie in to the Dark Tower, you don't have to. You c- you might not even be aware of it, and you don't have to be either. You know what I mean?
That's true because I absolutely loved his story, Low Men in Yellow Coats and Hearts in
Oh,
Atlantis.
that's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Absolutely loved it, and it ties in directly with the Dark Tower, but
hmm
I loved it anyway, even though I didn't know anything about the Dark Tower mythos.
Yeah, I read that story way before I started the Dark Tower series,
Mhm.
and it was one of my favorites then, and it's still one of my favorites now.
It's a
Yeah.
great collection. Hearts in Atlantis is an
Oh,
awesome collection.
it's touching. It's one of those books that'll make you laugh and cry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really, really affecting. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, what do you think is a good, or where do you think is a good place for people curious about Stephen King to start reading him?
Whew, I'm tempted to say do what I did and start with like his early collections,
hmm
Night Shift and Skeleton Crew, because they're very accessible. The stories are not yet quite at epic length.
hmm
You can read them pretty quickly.
They're
Um,
they're you could say bite-sized.
uh, if they wanted to start with a novel, I would say start at the beginning with Carrie, or certainly Salem's Lot. The Shining, like all those early novels, I think will really get people hooked. I think later on, when they get to stuff like Bag of Bones, they'll have a greater appreciation of it if they start with its earlier stuff first.
Awesome. Yeah.
Bag
Bag
of
of
Bones,
Bones.
by the way, is another one I loved.
I love that one too. Yeah.
Mm.
I've read that one three, maybe four times. Do you
Oh
reread
wow.
Stephen King at all, or
Um,
anything?
I try not to, I can't really reread books because I have so many books I haven't gotten to yet that I feel guilty if I just go back to a book I've already read, which is
Yeah.
silly. There are certainly books I would love to reread. I've mentioned Peter Straub already a few times on this podcast, and I would love to go back and read Ghost Story again. But then I look at my, to be to be read piles, and they are literally piles. And
Yep.
there's probably 200 books I haven't gotten to yet. And so I feel like, am I cheating myself out of a new experience if I go back to this comfort experience? I
Yeah.
don't know. I get weird about this kind of stuff.
No, that's not weird. I know that feeling quite well. Although I do reread, I try to force myself to reread more often, especially for doing stuff like this, the podcasting and whatnot. Sometimes I have to, but I find it's kind of rewarding sometimes because there's oftentimes you don't even remember what you read, or at least there's parts
Yes,
of it, and it's all kind of brand new again.
it feels new again. Definitely, you
Yeah,
might remember some sort of like broad, big picture, ideas about the plot or something, but then you get into the character nitty gritty, and it all feels new again.
yeah. All right, one final question before we get into the graveyard shift discussion, and that is, if you were to meet Stephen King, what would you like to be the conversation about? What would you like to talk to him about?
I would like to talk to Stephen King about time management because he's got a busy life. He's got a
Yeah,
family. He has his fingers in a lot of different pies,
yeah,
but he's cranking out books 2 a year at least. And I feel like I'm such a slow writer. I'd love to pick his brain about how you get that productivity going, how you can be that prolific, and still live a rewarding life. So I think that's what I'd like to know, because it takes me so long sometimes to write a book, and I get distracted, and and progress just inches along. And there's Stephen King after 90 books or whatever, still cranking them out, and they're still good.
yeah,
He's still bringing his A game. He's not whiffing it. So
yeah.
that's what I'd like to talk to him about.
And he's like 77, and
Crazy.
yeah, he's going to be like 90, and I might be somewhere near where he is at that point. He'll probably still blow me out of the water though. Yeah.
Yeah, he'll be 90 and still putting out 2 books a year, and it's just incredible. And so I'd love to pick his brain about how he manages that without just making himself exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. That's a good question. Yeah. Have you ever seen the when Stephen King and George R. R. Martin did like a show somewhere? I forget where exactly. But they were talking
No,
together, and George R. R. Martin looks at Stephen King and he's like, "How do you write so effing fast?"
I'm sure a lot of George R. R. Martin fans would love for him to be writing that fast too.
Yeah.
How many years have they been waiting for that last book in the Game of Thrones series?
It's been well over a decade. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm one of those people.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny, when the TV series started, I was like, surely he's going to have his final book out before the series ends. And then
Yeah.
they'll, draw on that, or they'll do something concurrent with it. And no, he's still as far away from publication as he was when that series started.
Yeah. Which is, well, it's not everybody can do it. I mean, we're just sort of sitting here complaining about how we can't write that fast either. So
It's true. It's
yeah.
true.
But yeah, all right. So we're gonna move along now to the discussion at hand here, and that is the graveyard shift. Now,
Yeah.
yeah, the graveyard shift is a short story by Stephen King, in case you didn't know.
Obviously.
And it was first published in the October edition of 1970 issue of Cavalier magazine. This is back in the day when Stephen King was publishing a lot of short stories and the nudies. There's a
Yes,
lot of nudies back then that
yes,
had
and
more than just
they all published really good fiction,
yeah.
and they paid well for
And
fiction.
well, there's people who always say, "Oh, I like to read the articles and the stories," right? Yeah, like they don't look at the pictures, but yeah,
Well, Cavalier and Gallery were just two of these men's magazines that published a lot of great writers.
it's true. It's very true. Um, So Stephen King, well, he's part of that good company, but he's maybe even the lead
Oh
of that.
yeah,
Yeah. Uh, but I want to say before we continue, to the listeners, if you guys haven't read this story, then I encourage you to go read it and then come back and listen, because we will be spoiling this book. It's not very long, so you don't have to worry, and it's really
yeah.
quite fun. It's a good fun horror story. I really
We're going to
enjoyed.
spoil a 50-odd-year-old story.
Yes, yes. All right, so here is the synopsis for this story, and of course, that's when my notes go all weird. All right, here we go. The narrative follows a drifter named Hal, who takes on a job at an old textile mill, working on the graveyard shift. As Hall and his fellow workers clean out the basement of the mill, they uncover a hidden nest of monstrous rats. The story builds tension through its eerie setting and the sense of impending doom, culminating in a horrifying confrontation with the creatures lurking in the dark.
Yes, this is actually indicative, I think, of King's very early work, in that it's a little bit more of a traditional horror story. It's
Absolutely.
very much a monster story.
Yes, it's a monster story. It could easily fit into one of those creep show type
Hmm.
anthology films if it were adapted. Oh, it
Yeah.
was adapted, but we'll maybe get to that later. But yeah, this story is interesting, and we talked a lot about characters. This one has some pretty strong characters right at the beginning.
Hmm.
I'd like to talk about Hal a little bit, or Hall, sorry.
Hall. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a drifter, and that's what I find interesting. And if you don't know what a drifter is, they travel from city to city, finding small jobs and whatnot, before they get sick of the place and move on. And I find this interesting because Stephen King has written about drifters before, like Roland Deschain from The Gunslinger. There's another character from The Dark Tower who I'm not going to name because that would be a huge spoiler. Danny Torrance and Doctor Sleep, and there's
Mm.
quite a few others. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on why Stephen King might come back every so often to this drifter character.
I do have thoughts on that, and I think he likes to use drifter characters because they're not tied down, and so they have, when they're presented with odd situations, such as being in a mill with crazy rat monsters, they have nothing to lose.
Yeah,
They're not going to be like, I'm not dealing with this because I got a family at home. I got to go and live for my kids, right? So
yeah.
drifters are great characters for when you want a character who has nothing to lose and will just get involved in what's happening in the story.
It's still an interesting choice though, because wouldn't it create more tension if he was married with children?
It would, in some ways, yes, definitely. But I think that King wanted to keep it short, and I think he wanted to just get to the meat of this story. This is actually, I'd say, one of his shortest stories, um, and I think the version I read, it was maybe 13 pages or something like that. But I think he just wanted to get to it. But even that, with that said, this is King's magic at work again.
Hmm.
We feel by the end of that first page like we know who Hall is. We know who he is. He's a
Absolutely,
drifter.
yeah.
He hasn't worked at mills through his whole life. He's gotten odd jobs at a bunch of different places. He's been a short order cook. He's been pumping gas, and now he's working at a mill, all in different states. And when we meet him, he's chucking beer cans at the rats, right?
Yeah,
That in the mill during it's like 3 a.m. or something. He's on the graveyard shift, which is the name of the story.
yeah.
And so just like all that stuff just tells you this is a guy who maybe has some issues. Maybe isn't the greatest guy in the world. Maybe isn't someone you want to hang out with all that much. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
but we're
I
going to be following him through this story.
That's the thing I like about Hall as a character is that he's the protagonist and he
Mhm.
kind of fights for what's right, but he's also still a bit of an asshole.
He's an absolute. Can we swear on your podcast? Yeah, he's an
Absolutely, yeah.
absolute asshole. He hates everybody he works with. He doesn't just hate management. He also works with that guy, Wisconski,
Yeah,
who he just continually labels as fat and lazy. And
you're right,
you know,
yeah.
yeah, somehow I got. There's a line where he says, somehow I got, paired up with the lazy Pollock or whatever. And it's like this guy is not a
Yeah,
role model. Like I don't, I would not
he's
want
a
to
little
hang out with him.
he's a little bit racist too. Yeah,
So he's
uh,
not great, but that's the power of the protagonist, though. You can write the absolute shittiest human being, and if you're following him through a story or a book, the audience will eventually want him to succeed because
yeah,
he's the main character. It's like the Sopranos effect. These are terrible people, but you
Yeah,
don't want Tony Soprano to get caught by the FBI. You want him to get
exactly. Yeah.
away.
Yeah, well, I find that reading unlikable characters is good if they're interesting, and Hall,
Absolutely.
but if they're not interesting and they're like supposed to be the hero, the anti-hero, whatever, then I lose interest. But this guy is interesting
He
because
is.
he pushes for like what's right. He sees what's going on around him that's wrong, and he hates it, like he hates everything else, but at least he has some, I guess, morality about him. But he's also that, he's that kind of jerk who like as you said, he's gonna like
Yeah.
insult everyone around him and
He's
just
not somebody I would consider like a union organizer or a
oh no,
hero or somebody who, stands up for the little guy.
he's not gonna be
This
your friend.
Yeah, the sense I got, and there's a lot of very sort of worker versus management stuff happening in the, at least particularly in the second half of the story.
Hmm.
Um, but the sense I got was that he just really hates the manager, whose name I'm forgetting now.
Warwick.
Um, Warwick. He hates Warwick more than he hates the idea of a boss or management. He just
Yeah,
hates this guy,
yeah.
right? And so he's absolutely, he knows he's leading Warwick to his death. I don't think he expects that he's leading himself to his own death, but he's definitely, he knows what he's doing when he brings Warwick down into that like sub basement.
Yeah, absolutely. But Warwick is like 4 or 5 steps above Hall. He is like a serious asshole boss in the sense that
Yeah,
he doesn't care about worker safety. He doesn't care about them needing the money to
that's
work.
right.
He's ready to fire people at a dime.
That's right.
Um,
There's one guy who's like, I don't want to keep doing this. These rats are freaking me out. And he's like, well,
yeah,
then you're fired, Yeah.
yeah. Well, people are getting bitten by the
Yeah. Yeah.
rats. And
And
and that's when he was like, "Yeah, you know what? I'm out. I'm gonna clock. Can I clock out?" And he was like, "You can clock out, but you're not clocking back in
you'll
ever."
never clock back in. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So he's pretty awful. Um, and I certainly I don't mourn him at the end of the story.
No, no, because he gets his just rewards. But do you think that Warwick and like because Stephen King, he worked a similar job. Do you think this abusive nature of employer is still irrelevant in today's North American first world society?
Sure. I mean, I think I've speaking from my personal experience, I've been very lucky in that I've never had a terrible boss
Hmm.
or terrible management. But I know plenty of people do, and I know that unionization is still a struggle for some industries and for some retail workers. Um, so yeah, I mean, I do think it's still relevant. I think it's very caricaturized in this story. Like Warwick really is like the shittiest of the shittiest,
Yeah, yeah,
So I
really
think
is. Yeah.
it's a little bit of a characterization or a caricature. But I think that there are shitty bosses out there. I think there are exploitative bosses out there. I think there always were, and there always probably will be. So that's always going to be relevant, and it's always going to be relatable. I think
Yeah.
reading a story like this, most people have had bad bosses in their lives, and they can absolutely relate to this, and they can absolutely say to themselves, "I wish I had done this to my boss."
Yeah, I can attest myself. When I've spoken to you about the factory work that I used to do.
That's right. I
Uh,
was thinking about you when I read this story because I know you worked in a factory. It's not the same as a mill, but it's
no,
similar.
it's not the same, but the whole management ideal of pushing their employees into uncomfortable things. There's like these silos at the back of the building that would hold
Mm.
resin, and during the I never had to do it, thank God. But they would make people wear like safety gear and climb those silos to clean off the dust when
Oh
nobody's
wow.
trained how to do that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's lucky nobody got hurt. And there was one time when I cut my fingers right across the nails.
Oof.
Like 3 of my fingers got cut right across the nails, and
Mm.
I was standing there with paper towel on it and bleeding on the floor. And one of the managers came out and he was like, "You can't bleed on the floor like that."
That was his concern.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was his concern.
Oh, you know
And
how hard it is to clean up blood off of these floors?
yeah, and so I could relate to this story very well. Yeah. It's nasty. But another question is, do you think Warwick? Because I kind of think I agree with this. Is Warwick a good example of typical Stephen King antagonist?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been subtler in his maybe in his later works, but there's always a human character who's just absolute pile of shit.
Yeah.
You know, even if the main threat of the book is supernatural, there's always at least one human character who's just a piece of shit, and
Absolutely.
just he's an antagonist, but he's not necessarily the main antagonist, but he's definitely a roadblock. You know, he's in the way of getting of what needs to be done,
He's a
right?
waste
So
of skin.
so I think of like I can't remember her name, the woman in the mist who sort of
Oh,
becomes
yeah,
like a
yeah.
cult leader, right? And she's
Yeah.
like, we have to sacrifice someone to make the monsters go away or whatever. She's absolutely shitty.
Yeah.
Because of course she by taking this role, she's like, well, I can't be sacrificed. Obviously, we have to sacrifice somebody else. Um, and so there's she's sort of an archetype of what happens in King books, where there's that one super shitty person. I think of also in It. Um, Beverly's father is super shitty, and then there are the bullies who are
Yeah.
super shitty. So he loves even when there's a supernatural threat to have shitty human beings still getting in people's way.
Yeah. Like, speaking of Stephen King's talent, he's really good at making you hate somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's like, you know, it's not just that Warwick is making people do things that like are pretty shady. You know, like there's a you know, having them, you know, clean and deal with all these rats without any protective gear and stuff like that. But it's also the way he keeps picking on Hall. You're a
Yeah.
college boy. You're a
Hey,
college
college
boy. You know,
boy. Yeah.
what's up, college boy? You know, and it's like, by the way, I don't think Hall needs to have been a college graduate for this story. He doesn't act like one. He doesn't, you know, he's never really like using his mind so much as his body in this. But Warwick won't leave him alone about it.
I think he
And
threatens Warwick in a sense because he's smarter than the rest of them.
right, right, and we do see that. I take back what I said. He does use his mind because we do see that at the end when he basically manipulates Warwick into going down that trap door into the sub basement.
Yeah.
He does that very extremely smartly, extremely well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know what stuck out to me though? This is so silly, but it's right there in like the first paragraph. Minimum wage in 1970 was $1.78 a year. I mean,
I know,
sorry,
right?
$1.78 an hour, not a
Yeah.
year. That's crazy.
That would be nuts.
$1.78 an
Yeah.
hour. That's like what the. Now I know
Yeah.
in 1970 the dollar went a lot farther, but come on, a
Yeah.
dollar 78 an hour.
That is incredible. Yes. Like,
Yeah, that really
I,
stuck out to me.
you got to wonder what like bread and milk and gas cost back then, because you're only getting maybe $40 a pay
Right.
a
Well, you
week,
know what?
right?
In 1970, I was all of 1 year old, so I can't tell you. I don't
Yeah,
remember, but I know
I
things were cheaper, but the dollar went farther. You know,
yeah, I wasn't even born yet, so I didn't notice prices of things until the 80s. So yeah,
I started noticing prices more in the 90s, and now I get confused when things don't cost what they did in the 90s anymore.
yeah, yeah. I hear you on that.
Like, why can't I find a hotel room in New York for under $100?
Well, I don't. If you did find one, I don't think you'd want to sleep in it.
No, yeah, that's probably not going to be the best place.
Don't bring out the black light. Let's just say that. Speaking of bad atmospheres,
Yeah, yeah.
that's unintentional, great segue. The Graveyard Shift is filled with like tons of atmosphere.
Hmm.
How do you think King is able to capture so much dread with his words?
Skill. That's I think he chooses his words very carefully, and I think he chooses words that will evoke an image in your mind with an economy of words, right? Especially with a short story, that's important. So I remember there's a scene when they're down in the sub basement. Oh no, they're in the regular sub basement. Just they're cleaning, they're power washing, they're getting rid of the rats or whatever. And there's a line where he likens that sub basement to a desecrated church. And that just brings all sorts of images to mind, like the not just the vastness of the space, but also what it means to be desecrated. Like this isn't just dust and dirt. This is, in a way, you know, filth. It's filth.
Yeah,
right? And it's that power he has. I talk a lot about Stephen King's power, but it's that power he has of using the right word in the right moment to evoke just the right image or feeling.
absolutely. So the story is about like I didn't go into too much detail with the synopsis, but Warwick, the boss, is like next week is the 4th of July week where
Yeah.
the mill shuts down. So we're gonna go down to the basement, we're gonna clean it out. And that's the main job. And there's of
Hmm.
course they find the sub basement, the second
Yes.
basement later on. But I have a part here I would like to read from when they go down to the basement, and I think this really kind of captures some of that dread and within the language itself.
Mm.
Okay, so Hall had known it would be bad, but this was murder. For one thing, he hadn't anticipated the smell. The polluted stink of the river mixed with the odor of decaying fabric, rotting masonry, vegetable matter. In the far corner where they had begun, Hall discovered a colony of huge white toadstools poking their way up through the shuttered cement. His hands had come in contact with them as he pulled and yanked at a rusty gear toothed wheel, and they felt curiously warm, like bloated. Sorry, warm and bloated like the flesh of a man afflicted with dropsy. The bulb
Hmm.
this sentence I love. The bulbs couldn't banish the 12-year darkness. It could only push it back a little and a cat and cast a sickly yellow glow over the whole mess. The place looked like the shattered nave of a desecrated church with its
That's
high
right.
ceiling and mammoth discarded machinery that they would never be able to move. Its wet walls overgrown with patches of yellow moss, and the autumnal choir that was the water from the hoses running in the half clogged sewer network that eventually emptied into the river below the falls. And the rats, huge ones, that made the ones on the third floor look like dwarfs. God only knew what they were eating down there. They were continually overturning boards and bags to reveal huge nests of shredded newspaper, watching with atavistic loathing as the pups fled into the cracks and crannies, their eyes huge and blind with the continuous darkness. It's like, geez, that's like poetry, you know?
Absolutely. Like, look at the language he's using. Look at the adjectives he's using to set that scene where he talks about, feeling like the flesh of a diseased person, or like something else is like the scent of rotting or decay. The darkness almost being a living thing that has to be pushed back by the light. I mean,
Yeah,
he's so good at setting that scene.
yeah. Like I said, it's like he notices things that we just most people notice but don't remember. And
Hmm.
that's something I've been trying to harness. When I notice
Yeah.
that type of stuff, why can't I remember it like he does?
I guess you got to train your mind, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I need
He's so good at that, and
I,
it's really those adjectives that he uses, like they bring it to life.
yeah. Now you said you'd never really had a boss that you didn't like. So this next question I think is will be interesting. But what was your reaction to the working conditions in the textile mill?
I'm not even like uh, familiar with OSHA rules or whatever, but I was like, this is terrible. These conditions are awful, um,
Yeah,
and they're basically like they need the money, so they're working this holiday weekend, and they have no choice. Like they can't back out of it now, or they will lose their jobs entirely. And it's that's awful. That's terrible. I would not want to work there.
no, I wouldn't either. And I've worked in similar places as we discussed. It's not fun. It doesn't make life a happy place. It's
There's an interesting detail where it's like I think it's after somebody has already been bitten, they finally get work gloves. Like they're finally allowed to wear work gloves on their hands when they're doing this
yeah,
awful work of moving old machinery and clearing out old furniture. They were just using their bare hands until that happened.
yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
crazy. That they should
That
have been
is crazy.
start. They should have started with gloves.
There's so many diseases that they could, find themselves with just by doing it that way, right?
Hmm.
The graveyard shift, I think, shows a really strong class divide in America. Uh, not just at the time, but even today, not to mention less than ideal, work conditions and
Definitely, yeah.
a lack of compassion and care for employees.
Yeah, sure.
But
Absolutely.
but why do you think it is that, this is something that we've kind of gone away from, or tried to anyway, and like I said, it does still exist, but why does it have to exist? Why do you think that is? Is it just power over people, or is it just, you're gonna get the job done, you have to do what you do to your
No,
people in
I think
order.
it's an idea that workers are expendable, and if you're not gonna do what I say, there are 100 other people looking for work right now who will do what I say.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just a sense of like, I can get away with whatever I want because it's a sort of a buyer's market or a boss's market, if you will. Like everyone's looking for work. If you're not going to do it, I'll find someone who will, right? It's
Yeah,
holding that economic leverage over people who are, living paycheck to paycheck.
yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's a real thing. It's
It does
there.
happen. And like
Yeah,
I
it
said,
does
I'm
happen.
lucky that I didn't never had that experience. I will say I've had some difficult bosses. I've had that, but never anyone that was like that. They were
Yeah,
just had difficult personalities.
until you go to work on Monday, and they're like, "Yeah, you know what? We have a problem in the basement, Nick, and
Yeah.
you're gonna have to go take care of it." You're like, "What?"
What? No. Or they're like, "Hey, we heard your podcast. We'd like you to come into the into my office. Close the door behind you. Oh, we need to have a talk."
We need to have a big oh, that that would be awful, yeah. Now, as we mentioned, they're in the basement, cleaning, and it's hard, grueling work, but,
Yeah.
one
And
of
people
them
are getting
fin
injured and bitten and all this stuff. It's really
yeah,
he sets
a
the scene very well.
a rat jumps out and actually, like, chews on one of their hands,
Mhm.
and, of course, they're gracefully allowed to go home after that. But do you think there's a symbolic connection, to the theme of class when they reach the second basement, when they find the second basement? Do you think there's, any meaning behind that? Because when they go down there, to me, it seems like this is what the secret is. This is the grueling mass behind the intention. This is the very reason why you're being chewed up and spit back out.
Yes, often when we have a horror story that takes place in the basement or sub-basement or some other subterranean dark place, what that represents usually is the unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind, of course, is where the monsters always lurk. The monsters being the worst parts of ourselves. There's a scene where uh, I think it's in the sub basements before they go down to the darkest place. But Hall is described as he's described with the words, his eyes gleamed in the dark. That's very rat like. That's a very rat like description.
Mhm.
And so especially as we have seen before then, the rat's eyes were gleaming in the dark. And I think that's on purpose. I think King is trying to say there's a connection between Hall and not the rats per se, but the queen rat, right?
Mhm.
That they find down in that sub basement.
Yeah.
Not like a sympathy between them because she would absolutely eat him as as quickly as she eats Warwick.
Yeah, yeah.
But like they both perhaps represent something. They both maybe represent that the thing that's eating away at the authority of Warwick and the management and the mill, right? They're both sort of eating away at that, and Warwick obviously doesn't like that, which is why he picks on Hall so much.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm coming to this theory as I'm talking about it, so it's a little bit choppy.
Oh, I
But
get it, I get it.
I do think that King absolutely chose those words. His eyes gleamed in the dark with knowledge, like knowing that he was basically describing the way the rat's eyes gleam in the dark as well.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah,
think
I
there
think you're
is,
onto something. There's a
yeah, I think there's
connection.
a pattern there, a connection
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once they reach that second basement, that's where the true horror lies.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
like it takes a while to get there, but I'd say that is the beating heart of the story is when they get
absolutely.
down into that dark space that's not even really the basement. Like it goes on beyond the boundaries of the mill, right? It's just a cave and it's
Yeah.
locked from the inside somehow.
Yeah.
Like
And
what's
they're
going
confused by
on?
that, right?
What's
Yeah.
going on? They're all confused by that. They find some human bones, so maybe somebody sacrificed themselves to lock it from the inside, knowing it was the last thing they would ever do. Um,
And they
though that
find
still seems
they
like a strange choice. Like you could just as easily lock it from the outside. Like I
yeah,
don't know.
and they also find crates down there that are, like,
Yeah,
40 years older than the textile mill itself,
right.
which
Which
is
actually
interesting.
they find one that has like a date of 18 something, and it reminded me of that scene in Creep Show where they find the crate under the stairs that's like dated back to 1910 or something like that. And there's the monster inside it.
Yeah,
Um, that's just a side note, but it put me in mind of that.
yeah,
But yeah, so that's there's a lot of hints about what might have been going on down in that sub basement, but we have no clue. We don't know the size of it, we don't know the shape of it, we don't know why it was locked from the inside, we don't know what's in those crates. It's just it might as well be another world, another planet.
yeah. I just wanna read one more part, and this goes, back to, the sort of abuse. This is, like, the first horror, just the horror of having to work a crappy job like this. But it also goes into, like, some of the horror of it as well. Uh, "Ray Upson had to go home," Charlie Brochu, said. "He puke?" someone asked. "I almost did." "No, Ray eat sorry, Ray'd eat Ray'd eat cow flop before he'd puke." I had to read that twice to make sure I had that right. "No, rat bit him." Hall looked up thoughtfully from his examination of Warwick. "Is that so?" he said. "Yeah," Brochu said, shook his head. "I was teaming with him. Goddamnedest thing I ever saw. Jumped out of a hole in one of those old cloth bags. Must have been big as a cat. Grabbed onto his hand and started chewing." So if that isn't a precursor to what you're going to find in the second basement,
100%. And I
yeah,
love how Hall is like his wheels are already turning in his head. Oh, a rat bit him. Is that so? Like he's getting this idea of like whatever's down there because he figured out that's where the rats are going. It's into that sub level.
yeah,
And so he's like, I'm just going to get Warwick down there and let them fricking eat this
let them have their
asshole.
way. Yeah.
I
Now,
almost, I mean, I almost wanted Hall to survive too by the end.
yeah, well,
Even
he
though he's
tried,
kind of a
right?
jerk.
He
He's
tried.
kind he
He
tried.
didn't.
He's kind
He
of a
didn't make
jerk.
it.
He's a bit of
Yeah,
an asshole, but like the rat's got the bigger asshole and he should get out of there, but he doesn't make it.
the description of the rats are in that second basement are really interesting too. They lost their legs,
Yes, they've
except I think they
mutated.
might have their back legs, but their front legs are gone, and they still have
Uh,
tails. I don't know if they have their back legs or not, but
I can't remember, but
I
yeah,
know
some
that they
some of their
can.
legs were gone. I think the implication was that they were evolving into those bat creatures.
Yeah,
Um,
because
uh,
there is something flying around in there too, and that's
yeah,
why it gets Hall.
yeah.
Yeah, which is
It's
just
super spooky.
it is like just imagine what you'd see if the lights were turned on and you could see everything. That would be awful.
Well, the rats are either mentioned or implied that they're blind because they've just been living and evolving in complete darkness, so they don't need their eyes anymore. So if
Yeah.
you were to turn on the lights, it wouldn't affect them. They wouldn't have no idea.
No,
They'd
but it
still
would
be
have
coming at you, but
it
you'd
would
see that, right?
yeah,
You
it
would
would
see the
affect you.
awfulness. Yeah.
You would suddenly become a character in an HP Lovecraft story where you're slowly going insane just from the
Absolutely.
sight of something.
It's funny. It's funny that you mentioned H.P. Lovecraft because I found bits of this story very reminiscent of his story, The Rats in the Walls, which
Yes, very
also
much so.
involves sort of mutated creatures and rats and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a very different story, but I would not be surprised because I know King read a lot of Lovecraft. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if he was inspired by that to
And
write
this
Graveyard Shift.
in the night shift here, this is the second time that you could say Rats in the Wall was an influence because the first story, uh, Jerusalem's Lot, has a lot of rats in the walls in that one
Mm,
too. I mean,
yeah,
it's even more so in a sense because it's in a house, but yeah, definitely, absolutely. The one thing I liked is that it's never explained what they're up against here. You just see rats mutating for some reason, and then they're turning into these weird, like bat-like creatures.
yeah.
It's like sure, but why were they trapped? Like how long were they trapped down there?
Well, that's the question, right? Like if this is just a weird arcane space under the mill.
Yeah.
So I feel like the regular rules of evolution may not really apply here. It's just there's a darkness here. Um, and I mean, there's no way that evolution would actually lead to a giant cow-sized rat that was like the
Yeah.
queen of the rats, right? That wouldn't happen. But down here, the rules are all off. There
Yeah.
are no rules. This is being governed by a completely different physics or not lack of physics or non-Euclidean geometry or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's got its own rules. It's a different plane of existence. It's like rat hell.
Yeah. Rat hell. I like that. It could have been called that.
I love the title Graveyard Shift, though. It's so
Yeah.
evocative
Yeah.
because of the use of the word graveyard, obviously. Brings to
Oh yeah.
mind,
But rat hell
dark
has its
things.
own charms.
Rat, Rat Hell's the sequel, yeah.
Sequel. Yeah. All right. So for some final thoughts here, um, what was your reaction to this rereading of Graveyard Shift? Like once you finished it, were you like, "Whoa," like
I
what?
was actually because I read this collection a very long time ago, and Graveyard Shift is not one of the stories that stuck with me since then. I guess I figured it was more of I don't want to say a lesser King story, but just like it's not one of the big ones that stuck with me. And so rereading it now, like we were talking about before, it felt new all over again. Like I was
Yeah.
discovering so much that either had gone past me when I read it in my youth, or I had just forgotten over time. Definitely, there's sort of that worker versus management idea going on, and just the weirdness of the mutant rats, which I adore. I love strange science, so I love mutations, right? And
There
so,
you go, right? This is kinda right down your alley if especially if something like this was true, right? So that would just get the
uh,
wheels turning. You'd be
so
thinking about
yeah,
zombie
I.
ants all over again.
So yes, I did. I enjoyed it. I was very happy to be assigned it for this podcast. I did enjoy it. I don't think I still would probably not place it among his top tier of
Mhm.
stories, but I think it's solid. It's a solid, enjoyable, classic horror story.
Yeah. It's very creep show, I think,
Hmm.
and, it works very well with that, and also, it's just a fun little monster story in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen the 1990 adaptation directed by Ralph S. Singleton at all?
I have not. It doesn't have a reputation of being one of the better Stephen King adaptations, so I kind of avoided it.
No, it's
Um,
definitely not, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you have seen it.
I have it was a long time ago, and I'm gonna be watching it for the Patreon, and I'm gonna be sharing my thoughts for that,
Okay. It'll
but
be
I
interesting
re
to see how they expand these characters into a 90-minute movie,
yeah, but I remember it being bad, and I didn't enjoy it, but I'm gonna take one for the team, and I'm gonna watch it again.
Well, I bet they tone Hall down a bit and make him a little bit more sympathetic to the viewer.
I wouldn't doubt that, but they might change the whole thing around anyway,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah.
They'll probably give him a love interest and or a family or something. You know
Yeah,
how it
probably,
is.
yeah.
But I bet Warwick will be absolutely the same asshole that he is in the story.
He kinda has to be for a movie, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
it'll be interesting. I'm tempted now to find it on streaming because I want to see how they deal with the mutant rats. I want to see how that is realized.
I know that the only thing I remember at all is and I could be wrong too, but is the rat bat type thing at the end,
Mm.
the creature reveal. And so, like I said, I'm gonna have to rewatch it just to see if I remember correctly, but I just have vague memory of that. I don't know, we'll see.
Taking one for the team.
Taking one for the team. Well, I want to thank you so much for reading the short story with me and coming on to discuss it with me, Nick.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was really fun, and I really did enjoy revisiting that story.
Now, before we go, do you care to plug anything else? And you're free to plug the things you've already plugged.
Yeah. So there are three books in the Dr. Laura Powell series, which is the science-based horror thriller series I was mentioning at the top. The Hungry Earth, The Stone Serpent, and The Mind Worms. They're on sale now. They're really fun. And if you like podcasts like this one, maybe also check out my podcast, Spooky Science Lab. You can find it wherever you listen to your podcast. It's everywhere. And I hope you like it.
I can attest. Both are great. I read the trilogy.
Yes, you
Uh,
did. Yes,
yeah,
I
the Laura
appreciate that.
the Laura Powell trilogy. That's just fun, and it goes into some weird science.
It sure
We we
does.
we did some weird science episodes on the Jason's Weird Reads YouTube
Yes,
channel,
that
which
was a
was
lot of
always fun.
fun.
Yeah, and the podcast itself deals with more weird science. So if that's your jam, you're gonna have a lot of fun. Let me tell you.
Thank you.
All right. So where can people find you if they want to reach out at all,
Oh
or
yeah,
just
well
follow what you're doing?
I've got a website, www.nicholaskaufmann.com. Don't forget there's two N's at the end of Kaufmann. If you go to nicholaskaufmann.com with one N, I can't guarantee what kind of site you're going to find. Maybe it'll
Yeah,
be just pictures of cats if you're lucky.
might
Um,
be.
and you can find me on the socials. I'm on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, and LinkedIn for some reason. But I'm out
That even
there.
still exists.
I'm out there, so I'm pretty easy to find. Nicholas Kaufmann with two N's at the end of Kaufmann.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone who listened today, and we'll be back again shortly.
Thank you, Jason.